I'm Esperanza Payana, Executive Director, Wild Seeds Fund. We're a national movement-led participatory grant maker advancing frontline organizations and narratives that build power and embolden transformative change to our food and agricultural systems. And I have the joy of introducing our keynote speaker, Stephen Satterfield. Before Stephen founded Whetstone Media and hosted the Netflix documentary High on the Hog, he was already making his mark as an award-winning food writer, sommelier, producer, and media entrepreneur. I first met Stephen back in 2016, and from our very first conversation, we connected over a shared frustration that food media at the time felt myopic and culturally homogenous. We talked about cultural decolonization and swapped stories of traveling through Mexico's diverse regions and found in each other a kindred sense of possibility. At that point, Stephen had already founded and was leading the International Society of Africans in Wine, supporting Black winemakers across Africa, and was preparing to launch what would become the stunning Whetstone magazine, the only Black-owned food media company in print. Meanwhile, I was in the process of letting go of my reductionist, policy-driven view of food and agricultural systems change and leaning instead into the brilliant creative world and investing directly in frontline leaders, the innovators, the organizers, the storytellers, shifting narrative power and building collective care. In 2021, Wild Seeds Fund had the true honor of recognizing Stephen's work with an Impact Media Award for Whetstone's weekly podcast, Point of Origin. When I think of the colleagues doing the immense work of revolutionizing the food and agriculture media landscape, Stephen is, without question, one of the very first names that comes to mind. His sharp intellect, eloquent writing have helped carve a path for our narratives to reach broader audiences, shaping beliefs, inspiring empathy, and sparking collective action, and helping give rise to a different world. And yet, through it all, then and now, he has remained remarkably humble, encouraging, and kind, a rare and beautiful gift in today's world. So it is with genuine gratitude and deep appreciation that I'd like to welcome Stephen to the stage.
This together. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. Thank you so much, Esperanza. I remember those conversations well, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you to SAFSF for the opportunity to be here. And, I am often in rooms where I'm trying to make the case for food. And the wonderful thing about being in this room today is that I don't need to make the case to you all. So we can just jump right into the theory and the practice. I really want to not focus so much on my own personal story as I'm fatigued and exhausted of hearing myself talk about myself. But I do think it's an important context for what I want to leave you all with, which is basically how I came to many of the conclusions that I have and how my provenance theology has infused and imbued my work, and I hope can do the same for you all today. So, as Esperanza mentioned, my culinary career actually began as a wine professional, as a sommelier, a mouthful, no doubt. In that world of wine, we have a way of understanding wine that separates amateurs from professionals. And the framework that we were using in the wine business could really be distilled down into a single word that we call terroir. So terroir is a French word, as is sommelier, and maybe some of you all know this, but the terroir is basically not just the soil, but all of the elements, environmental and human, that ultimately define the character of the wine itself. And so for amateur wine drinkers, we like to talk about how it tastes, what it smells like, what kind of fruit or flower perhaps. Whereas sommeliers get together and we talk about the soil, what the characteristics of the particular vintage were. Was it a long harvest? Was it a rough harvest? Were there environmental factors outside of the control of the winemaker? And what were the human inputs or interventions that the winemaker had to take on in order to ultimately define the character of the wine? So I spent time for many years learning about this system. The system became our framework of understanding, and eventually it became so ingrained in my mind, terroir, that I started to see terroir everywhere I looked. I started to see terroir of other humans, of other places, of other people. And so far as I started to look at all of the encompassing environmental factors that helped me make sense of people that I was in community with, or even places that I came to know. And one of the things that was discouraging and confounding for me as a wine professional was our inability to take this really helpful framework of understanding and apply it to our everyday lives. We were really, really good at anthropomorphizing a wine, for instance, but we weren't able to give our fellow humans the same kind of consideration when it came to their own environmental inputs. So this hypocrisy really stuck with me until ultimately I decided that terroir was a concept that I wanted to build from. And because it's a word that is hard to pronounce and therefore inherently exclusive, I started to simplify the message and the framing from terroir to origin. Origin. So origin for me is really about provenance. It's a theory of place that takes all of our environmental factors into consideration. When we look at our individual origins, and especially in a culinary or an agrarian context, one of the first things that we notice is that for most of the food that we consume, we don't have the luxury of being able to trace the origins of the food. Most of our food is a commodity that is faceless and placeless, and that is very much part of the design of our food system. It's the system that we all inherited. It's the system that was perfected on the plantation, and it is the system that will continue to strangle us all until we can identify it, name it, and break it. So how can you counter commodities? What is the counterpoint to a nameless and placeless and faceless environment? Provenance is the answer. Legibility is the answer. And the stakes for this, I believe, are not obvious, but essential to understand. So part of what I have come to understand is that when you are able to make eyes with the person who grew your food, or in some cases who grew your clothing, what you are actually doing is interrupting a centuries-long cycle of erasure and obfuscation. And I learned this in the same way that many of you all learned this from the indoctrination of the farm-to-table food system. And I really, especially in the time I was in California, came to understand that the conclusions I was drawing about provenance and place were not divergent, but perhaps a little bit more nuanced than a lot of my colleagues at the time. And what I mean by that is when we are not able to identify where our food comes from, we're not able to understand where the power lies as well. So really, food has been my primary means of study because it's the only thing that connects all of us. It is much like the air that we breathe, with the really vital exception that we don't have a choice to breathe. We just must breathe to exist. With food, assuming that we do have choice and we do have access, it becomes a matter of culture, of identity, of heritage, of ancestry, and a unique tool to connect each and every one of us. The fact that we all have breath is not actually a basis of human connection. The fact that we all have to eat gives us that human potential of connection in a unique way. And so when we have what is otherwise a radical opportunity of connection that is interrupted by ambiguity, by obfuscation of the growers, of the farmers who feed us all, we're actually conceding to power what should otherwise belong to all of us. And so if we want to look at the power of food, we have to understand the power of provenance. The difference between a luxury product like a $500 bottle of wine and I don't want to say a brand in case y'all are, let's just say a slightly more modest bottle of wine. That difference is really in provenance. It's a story of provenance. And when you are able to trace the folks who grew the wine, the makers, the vignerons, we have developed a complex system for uplifting the folks who have the resources to own the land, to own the story, to trade off of that value, that ownership, at the expense of those who do not have the same privileges. And so the value is captured by those who already have the privilege. Again, this is a continuation of a plantation system that began all the way back in the 1500s at least, or maybe even sooner if you look at sugar and the Canary Islands, for instance. The plantation system of agriculture has evolved with each and every generation, and we are still under its grip. This is why origin is so important, because many of the problems that we're trying to solve today, without this historical context, is an incomplete rendering of the full picture. If you're trying to solve a problem without understanding the origins of the problem, the likelihood of you solving the problem is almost impossible. So the case for understanding where things come from, much like sommeliers understanding the nature of the environmental factors that inform what the wine tastes like, I believe can be extrapolated into the work that you all are doing by simply asking the question of, where did this begin? Where did this begin? How many times have you asked yourself in the work that you're doing, not what the purpose is, but what the provenance is? what is the origin of the problem you're trying to solve? Looking at the system that we've inherited, where the value is captured by those who already own the land, where the extraction of labor, free labor, has become the way that we understand things are done, business as usual, we have to take it upon ourselves to uplift the stories of the people who are otherwise nameless and faceless in this value chain. That has been really the definitive through line of my entire career, whether that was working with South African winemakers, whether that was working with Food Origins as a publisher, and now in the context of clothing and apparel. So I'm actually wearing a shirt from a new company that I've started, where we are bringing provenance to Black farmers growing cotton in the US South, and bringing that value through legibility, through traceability, all the way to the consumer. So this is now, oh, thank you. Thank you. And the reason that I bring that up is I want you all to consider where the point of action is for you in the theory and the practice. And so for years, I made the case for origin as a means of understanding, as a means of reclamation, as a counterpoint to erasure and obfuscation, where those who own the least have no means of actually owning the value that they create. So legibility in an environment of erasure is actually the tip of the spear. It's our most formidable weapon, because with obfuscation and erasure, the tricky part about it is we can't actually see the forces that are controlling us. We're not able to actually identify who we are advocating for, and also what the challenges are that those people face, because we don't see their faces. So it's a unique challenge. It's a challenge that begins with reclamation and restoration of our own stories, our own personhood. And so, as I'll talk to Conda and Sean about later, the work that we are doing, that many of you are doing, is really about bringing ourselves and our stories back into an environment of legibility after centuries where our presence was capitalized on but was never acknowledged. So if we look at how this works in your field, for instance, I would encourage you all to look at the problems that you're solving and ask yourself, have you adopted the way of the sommelier? Have you adopted a kind of logic that doesn't just ask what the problems are that you're looking to solve, but what the provenance of the problems are that you are looking to solve, what the origins of the problems are that you are looking to solve. And in doing this, you will find, it is a process that I call origin foraging, right? And I call myself the origin forager. This is what I do. I go look for where this all started. And I would encourage you all to adopt this way of thinking that will move you from an amateur way of consumption into a professionalized mode of consumption, the way of the sommelier, where understanding the soil, the climate, the elevation, the slope, the geography ultimately inform what we're tasting and evaluating. And understanding that absent that rigorous process of evaluation, what we're left with is basically just talking about how the wine tastes. And so it's an incomplete telling of why does the wine taste the way that it does. Right? Is everyone following me on this? Okay. So when I think about now the work that I'm doing, it really came from a place of understanding stories are the most important means and method that we have to insert our personhood back into a system that has systematically erased our presence. So before, or certainly concurrently with your origin foraging, I want you all to look specifically for the people who are missing from the story. And you may have to go looking for them because their absence was not incidental or coincidental, rather. It was actually the essential foundation of the structures that we've all inherited. This became personal for me as a sixth-generation Atlantan whose ancestors actually came through these shores right here in Savannah and ultimately into the middle of Georgia, 25 miles southeast of downtown Atlanta, on a cotton plantation that is now a church and a cemetery, that I found not only my own inspiration and personhood in the restoration of my family's story, I found out that I was named after an enslaved cotton worker on a plantation, Stephen Daniel. And so for me, the legibility not only of my own family, but of this system of cotton that we've all inherited, this proto-money that we've all inherited, the precursor to capitalism that we've all inherited, at no point has that value ever belonged to the descendants of enslaved African people. And yet we are all still spending cotton money. We're all still spending it. And the value of what was retained through this system has perpetuated. It has been continuous and uninterrupted because the laws may change, the generations may change, but the system does not change. And I recognize that sometimes when people start talking about systems, it feels really vague. It doesn't feel tangible. But what I'm suggesting to you all is that that's actually the work that needs to be done. The point is that it's not supposed to be tangible. It's supposed to be obscured. So the work ahead of all of us is naming who is missing, what is missing. So when we look at our clothing and we want to know what is missing from the story of our garments, it's the legacy of African American ownership. Who is missing is the work that is in front of all of us. And I know that many of you all are very, very fluent in the language of farm to table. Shop at local farmers markets. This is a way of thinking that is now sort of been reduced to class privilege. That's not helping us out. What we actually need to do is understand the politic of provenance, the politic of the power of buying food directly from a small producer, from a local farmer. Because what that interaction is doing, it is interrupting a system of obfuscation that has us all in a collective purgatory. And so for me, coming to the provenance of garments was about answering a question that had been resolved for me in the world of food. Who grew your food, right? In the Bay Area, where I lived for several years, many of the restaurants there would list the names of the farms on the menu. Maybe at the beginning as a point of pride, but ultimately as a means of professionalism. If you did not have the name of the farms on your menu, you had a credibility problem. We don't have that same rigor in the clothes we wear, even though they're both agricultural products. Why is that? Well, we have to go back to the origins of cotton to understand that the commodity that connected the world created asymmetrical benefits. And so if we want to create a more symmetrical, a more equitable environment, we have to really look for opportunities to insert ourselves in stories where we've been erased, to lift up those who have been erased in the telling of their own provenance terroir. So, thank you. So that's what I want to leave you all with today. I want you all to embody the mode of an origin forager, to look at the problems that you're trying to solve, not only from the context of what's broken or how do we fix it, but how did it start? And I think that you might find that your practice actually leads you to places that you might not have otherwise expected to go. I did not expect to go from food into manufacturing garments and apparel. But in order for me to live out my theory of reclamation and provenance, this became the obvious thing that was missing. And I believe that there's probably something in your world, in your work, in your community that is not obvious to you right now, but is actually the work that will be most impactful. And I believe that you can get there through interrogating the point of origin. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.